What's up, chess player, and welcome back to the favorite type of the videos on this channel, where I just explain you why the way you play chess is not really the way you should play chess. And of course, I help you as much as I can to improve your chess level and explain you all of the strategical as well as tactical principles so you can play a better chess game. So here, 1400 level, my subscriber Konstantin Kuletsky played as white, and I'm gonna show you this incredible game where white actually played the pawn cloud attack. You're gonna be amazingly surprised with it, but actually that helped in the later events white to have a winning position here. But yeah, let's just take a look at it. So here, black starts with the move c5, a very aggressive move from the very beginning, trying to put some pressure on white. White took it, and now, yeah, you might say there are some potential ways to try to win this pawn on c5, to protect it and make sure you're pawn up, but you should always be very careful with that, because notice that now in the center, your opponent has two pawns, very strong ones, and so black is playing here knight c6, preparing the move e5, and then trying to just control the center completely. And you remember, who is in the control of the center is in the driver's seat, in most of the cases at least. So that is a pretty dangerous strategy here, leaving that much space for your opponent. Instead, you could play c4, trying to continue this fight for the center, because you're white, you need to fight for the initiative, of course. So knight c3 has been played. If you wanted to pick up this pawn, you could have continued the idea with a3 and b4, and yes, black will get the control of the center, but you're a pawn up, your bishop might potentially go to b2, where it's gonna be very strong along the long diagonal, and of course, you still need to somehow fight for the center, maybe e4, c4, e3, and so on. So what happened instead is knight c3. I'm not a big fan of this move. In general, in the d4, d5 positions, I never recommend to put your knight on c3 or to c6 if you're playing black, before you're pushing the c-pawn. So black did it the right way. They played c5 and then they played knight c6. The reason behind that is that if you're doing like here, you don't really have enough space for your pieces. The queen has nowhere to go, and also you're not really fighting for the center. You're not putting any pressure on this d5 pawn. Right now you're attacking it, but it's so easy for black to defend, and then you don't need another attacker there, which you desperately need. And instead of just developing a new piece, it's always, like 99% of the cases, it's better to develop a new piece instead of making the second move with the same one, which is here the d4 pawn. And yeah, knight f6 could have been a very good alternative here. So knight e4 has been played, protecting the pawn on c5. You could see that the engine recommends knight to a4. The reason is the knight also protects the pawn, but it's so much more difficult to somehow get to this knight for black. I mean, you can play queen to a5 check, but there is a simple move c3, and then you're preparing the move b4, and the knight is protected, the c5 pawn is protected. If you take here on c3, you just take back, and you have a normal knight without this pawn on c2 anymore. Of course, you lose a pawn, but black has to make a lot of moves with the queen, which is not that perfect in the opening. So what has been played is knight e4 instead. I can understand why you did it, because you're going towards the center instead of going to the side of the board, which is normally very, very natural, so I can't really blame you for this move. e5, yes, the problem is that this knight could always get under attack here on e4. Knight f6 could have been a good option. e5 I also like, because that is a central pawn now protecting the d4 one. Yeah, black is having a very good compensation for the c5 pawn. And potentially bishop takes c5, knight takes, queen a5 check, winning the piece back is also an idea in the air. e3 has been played, and now bishop f5. Well, chess.com might say that it's an inaccuracy, but what I like about black's play is that it's really aggressive. From the second move, you could notice that black is trying to create as many threats as possible, and especially on a low-rated level, which is 1400 here, this strategy so often pays off. So your task is to combine somehow developing your pieces, controlling the center, and creating the threats for your opponent. So when you can develop a bishop and at the same time attack the knight, that is normally a very good thing. Well, here there are some tactical problems connected with knight g3, and then you need to spend another tempo with this bishop, but I mean, that's pretty complicated, especially for such a level. So in general, I really like the strategy. Moreover, white played here bishop to d3 instead of going back, which I also can understand. And here bishop takes e4. That is really something I don't understand, I don't support, and I recommend you never do that in your games. Never exchange the bishop for a knight without very significant reason to do that. I mean, this bishop on e4 is now perfect. Of course, it could get attacked later on, but still, you have a pair of bishops, that's great. And why would you do that voluntarily as black? I don't really get it. Queen a5. So I guess the reason was to pick up the c5 pawn back, but I don't believe this pawn had any chances to survive either way, so you don't really need to give up your bishop's pair for that. Bishop d2 takes, and now bishop takes c6. And in this case, you can see the engine says it's a good move, but once again, I never recommend you to exchange your bishop for a knight voluntarily. Let's see what you could do instead. You can, of course, continue your development. That is always the best thing you can do. So castles here is a perfect move. If your opponent is attacking you, then you can think what you can do with this bishop. You can either take it here on c6, but after your opponent attacked, not before that, not voluntarily. Or you could try to find some attacking resources, like this pawn takes on d4, you're attacking the queen, there is no time for the knight to take this bishop, and it's not that simple to pick this pawn up. You can't obviously do that with your queen, you can't really do that with your knight, because you're opening up the entire diagonal, and the bishop will be just a monster, winning the pawn, and your king is still in the center. But if you take with a pawn, it's also not that great, because now you are opening up this e-file, and now I can take on c6 with a check, winning a tempo. If you take with a queen, by the way, d4 is hanging. If you take with a pawn, then this rook is coming to e1. I mean, that is a horrible position for black. You can continue it with queen to e2, for example, and you're simply not allowing your opponent to castle. You're making it very complicated. There are also some a3, bishop b4 ideas. I mean, that is not a position you would like to find yourself as black after the opening. But never do that voluntarily, never take the knight, changing it for a bishop. So, takes, and now knight e5. And that is, once again, the same mistake that so many lower-rated players are making. So, you don't want to make a second move with the same piece which has already been developed. Moreover, you're allowing your opponent so much of a counterplay here. Queen takes g2, attacking the rook, you're not going to be able to castle anymore, at least this side. I mean, that is not something you want here. Instead, you could have taken on d4, and yeah, that's also probably an extra pawn, because once he takes back, you don't need to take it immediately because of the same reasons, but this pawn is going to be always weak, and it's isolated one, and the e-file is open, so you have queen e2 check once again. So everything is great, but knight e5, this move can't be good, because now queen takes g2, and white played here king to e2. That is why I said you that white played a bomb cloud attack here. Well, later than usual, but still you could see that it's a very weird move. There are still a lot of pieces on the board, and white is doing that. And you would ask, why? Why on earth would you do that? I mean, that's so risky, and I would completely agree with you. Yeah, you could see that the normal move is here, queen to f3, just go into the endgame. In the endgame, remember, it doesn't really matter whether your king is in the center, but, well, you can still castle if you want. So there are no difficulties at all. King to e2, I mean, I can't explain. It's not like you are fighting for an advantage with this move. I can't explain the purpose of this move. You're just voluntarily taking a huge risk of having your king in the center with the queens on the board. Remember, once the queens are off, you can do whatever you want with your king. It's very difficult to get into trouble. Although this game is a perfect example of the opposite of what I'm saying. You're going to see it later. But with the queens on the board, it's especially extremely dangerous here. Bishop c5 has been played. Instead, queen to e4 could have been a very good opportunity, just attacking this knight, which is kind of very weirdly placed. And you need to make another move with it, which is very unusual. But Bishop c5, developing another piece, now creating some threats here again. I quite like it. Queen to g1 happened now. White realized the mistake, I suppose, and tried to exchange the queens, but of course, black didn't want to do that. Although, yeah, I mean, that doesn't really make any sense in terms of the king in the center, but seems like black has no other option because the g7 pawn is hanging. And so even though black is attacking here the knight, you can see that there is a blunder sign of this move because the g7 pawn is hanging here. So that is what white should have played, although unfortunately white played knight to d3 back. Queen g7 seemingly doesn't have any drawbacks because you are now connecting your rooks, you're protecting your knight, and you're attacking your opponent's rook, and moreover, I don't really see any way to defend it. So yeah, the move seems to be really great, and knight d3 is a move back. So you always start with the moves forward, and only if you don't have anything active, no checks, no captures, no threats, then you're just, considering those defensive moves, backward moves. If that would help you somehow to remember, Robert Fisher always said, I never go back, I always try to go forward. So try to follow this principle. Pawn takes on e3 and knight takes c5. Yeah, so black is at least temporarily sacrificing a piece here, but then definitely one of the pieces could be taken afterwards. Knight d3 back is a very good move in this case, because you might not know it, but the knight is a very important, very good defender for the king. Somehow it helps, for example, here takes, it helps to cover the king from all of the sides, and it's also well protected by the pawn. You don't have any checks with black, so knight is a very, very good defender for the king. Castles, yeah, still you could see that having the king in the center is very dangerous. Now finally white takes the pawn on g7, but it's kind of late from the perspective of winning the rook, because with the castles it's very easy for black to defend. Although you could see according to the computer there was also queen to f4. Now with a fork there, the king is in trouble. Knight d7 has been played and queen c3. Finally, white achieves the goal of exchanging the queens, which is, with such a weak king, a huge achievement. So I really admire this move. Hopefully, yeah, somehow maybe my videos inspired you to do that. And now seems like you couldn't get into trouble anymore, but that is not what happened in this game. White played a move that is gonna surprise you 100%. King to c4. Can you imagine that? Instead of going backwards and just hoping to finally be safe with the king, white is going forward. Now remembering what Fisher said, never go back, and I mean king to c4. That is such an incredible move. I don't have any words to explain it, to be honest. Yeah, I can understand that after king to d2 your problem was that the knight would be pinned, but so what? I mean, your king is still pretty safe, you have some time to develop your rooks. Afterwards, you put your rook somewhere here, you're gonna defend the pawn on d3, you're never gonna get into trouble, but with the king on c4, you're risking so much, and I don't even see why. I mean, what is the king doing here? What kind of use it could bring? Rook to e8. I like this move from a point of developing all of the pieces now. They're all in the game. The drawback is, of course, that white can fight for this file, and then, yeah, it's difficult to get something out of it for black. Knight b6 check. King finally went back to c3, allowing another check. So if you're fighting against the knight, it's always great to have your king 2 squares away from it, or 1 square away diagonally, because then the knight has no way to give a check, and that is exactly the case here. In case of king to c3, you're allowing another check to happen. Now king to b3, b5, protecting the knight, takes, king to b4. I don't like this move. I have to be honest with you, even though you could see this arrow here, I don't like it. Why? Because your rook is still incredibly passive on h1 square. Remember, you need to develop your pieces, all of your pieces. It doesn't matter whether it's the opening, the middle game, or the end game, like you could see here. If you're not developing your pieces, you're not winning the game. So instead, you could play rook to g1, you could play rook to e1 maybe, trying to exchange the rooks, because, well, you're a pawn up, so that would be a great strategy for you to exchange everything, and then you can go on with your king. But that move allows some penetration from this rook and, yeah, some ideas for black which you don't really need. b3, now rook e4 check, another idea. King is going to a5, but the problem is the same. Your rook is just not participating in the game. Till that is the case, you're just a rook down. I mean, could you imagine that? You would never play a rook down voluntarily, but that is exactly what you are doing here. So king to b7 has been played just to defend it. You can't take it because of the checkmate, but guess what? That is exactly what happened. White just took it. So the nature of this mistake is clear. You saw the knight, you took it. But what comes here into play, what should come here into play is calculating the variations. Before you're making your move, before you're making a very active move, attacking the knight, you should always assume that your opponent is a very strong chess player. You can't assume that he is so stupid to play king to b7 without thinking what's going to happen after pawn takes knight. I mean, you can think of him whatever you want, but I would suggest you to think of him as a very strong chess player. That's going to help you a lot. Because then you would think, why on earth would he leave the knight here under attack where he has a lot of options to go somewhere, and instead he's playing king to b7? There should be a reason behind it. So what if I'm gonna take? At the same time, you should never believe your opponent. It's not like he's playing king b7 and you're saying, okay, you have left your knight under attack, so I'm not gonna take it. You should try to calculate the variations. What's gonna happen in this case? Does my opponent have any checks? That's always the first question you ask yourself. And in this case, the only check is rook takes a4 that has been played in the game, but that is checkmate in one here. So two main mistakes that my subscriber made in this game is first, not activating, not developing all of your pieces, and secondly, not calculating the variations before you're making your moves. If you're gonna work on those two things, you're gonna be such a stronger chess player, and hopefully this video helped you a lot with that, understanding how you can apply those principles we have discussed here in your own games. And in this one, I'm showing you another game of my subscriber, a nearly perfect game that a 900 rated chess player played. I mean, you absolutely must take a look at it. It's a perfect example of how you should apply the principles I'm teaching you here.